What would you do if a stranger shattered your understanding of who you are with just a few words? What if that stranger wasn't begging for forgiveness, but demanding that you listen? Tyler Bennett never expected miracles. Life had trained him not to. Every morning began the same way, the scrape of rusted wheels against cracked pavement, the burn in his palms, the quiet humiliation of being invisible in plain sight. The city moved around him, never for him. Suits hurried past, laughter echoed without him, and hunger gnawed like a familiar enemy that never slept. Tyler didn't stop pushing his wheelchair because stopping meant thinking and thinking meant remembering everything he'd lost without ever having it. The central plaza buzzed with noise and heat. Food carts hissed and sizzled, their smells cruelly tempting. Coins occasionally clinked into his battered tin can, each one a small mercy. Tyler counted silently. Maybe today he could buy something warm. Maybe today wouldn't end with leftovers scraped from a trash bin. That was when she appeared. She didn't rush, she didn't avoid him, she didn't toss a coin and walk away. The elderly woman stopped directly in front of him, close enough that Tyler could see the deep lines carved into her face by time and regret. Her silver hair was loosely tied, her dress simple and faded. But her eyes, those eyes didn't belong to someone fragile. They burned with intention. "You're Tyler Bennett." The words struck him harder than hunger ever had. No one knew his full name, not the vendors, not the police. Not the people who stepped over him like he was part of the sidewalk. His fingers tightened around the can as his heart began to pound. "You have the wrong person," he said, though even he didn't believe it. She leaned closer. Her hand brushed his cheek, cold, dry, trembling. "I don't have much time," she whispered, "but I couldn't leave this world without finding you." Before Tyler could pull away, she placed something in his hand. A key, old, bronze, heavy. It didn't feel symbolic, it felt real, too real. Attached to it was a faded red cord worn thin by years of waiting. 47 Sunflower Lane, she said. "You need to go today." Tyler stared at her, his mind racing. A stranger, an address, a key, talk of time running out, none of it made sense. "Why?" he asked, the word breaking through his fear, her eyes filled with tears. "Because 32 years ago I made a choice," she said softly. "And that choice destroyed your life before it ever began." The crowd moved around them, unaware that Tyler's world had just cracked open. The woman stepped back, already fading into the flow of people, leaving him with a burning key and a question that would haunt him forever. What was waiting for him at that house, and why did it feel more dangerous than the life he already knew? Have you ever felt a pull so strong that ignoring it feels more painful than obeying it? That was the feeling tightening around Tyler's chest as he stared at the bronze key resting in his palm. The woman was gone, vanished into the crowd as if she had never existed at all. But the weight in his hand proved she was real. The metal was warm now, almost alive, and the red cord dangled between his fingers like a warning. 47 Sunflower Lane. Tyler knew the street. Everyone in the city did. It sat on the other side of town, buried in a neighborhood people whispered about: abandoned mansions, broken gates, ghosts of wealth long gone. It would take hours to get there. His arms already burned. His palms were split open in places where old wounds never fully healed. Logic screamed at him to stay. This was madness. Strangers didn't hand out keys to forgotten houses. People didn't confess life-destroying sins to beggars in wheelchairs, but logic had never fed him. Logic had never answered his questions. Tyler tucked the coins into his side pocket and turned his wheels toward the street. The sound of metal scraping concrete drew irritated glances. He ignored them, he always did. Every push forward felt heavier than the last, yet something inside him pushed back harder. A pressure in his chest he couldn't name, fear braided tightly with hope. The city changed as he moved. Glass towers gave way to brick buildings, then to cracked sidewalks and overgrown lots. Traffic thinned. The air grew quieter, heavier. By the time the sun began sinking toward the horizon, Tyler's arms trembled violently. Blood smeared his palms, mixing with grime and sweat. Still, he didn't stop. When he finally reached Sunflower Lane, twilight painted the sky in bruised shades of orange and purple. The houses stood like tired giants, ivy crawling over stone walls, windows dark and watching. Number 47 waited at the end of the street, partially hidden behind a rusted iron gate. Tyler pushed it open. The metal groaned as if protesting his arrival. The path to the front door was impossible for a wheelchair, uneven stones, broken edges. Tyler looked down at his legs, then at the door, then at the key. There was no choice. He lowered himself to the ground, stone biting into his knees and elbows as he crawled forward. Each inch was agony. Each breath tasted like damp earth and decay. By the time he reached the door, his body shook with exhaustion. He fitted the key into the lock. It slid in smoothly, as if it had been waiting for him all along. The door opened with a low, hollow sound. Darkness swallowed him. Then, as his eyes adjusted, Tyler saw it, something impossible, something that made his heart seize. A massive oil painting stared back at him from across the room. And the face in that painting was his. If this house held answers, Tyler was about to discover whether the truth could hurt more than a lifetime of poverty ever had. What would you do if the proof of your existence was staring back at you from a wall meant for someone else? What if the truth didn't whisper but demanded to be seen? Tyler froze at the threshold, his breath trapped in his chest. The painting dominated the room, nearly 7 feet tall, illuminated by a narrow blade of fading daylight slipping through heavy curtains. Dust floated in the air like suspended memories, settling gently on a face Tyler knew too well. Not because he had seen it before, but because he lived in it. The eyes were unmistakable. One slightly drooped at the corner, a flaw Tyler had hated his entire life. He had seen it reflected in store windows, in puddles after rain, in every reminder that he didn't belong anywhere. Now that same imperfection stared back at him from a gilded frame worth more than everything he owned combined. This wasn't coincidence. This was inheritance. His heart pounded as he dragged himself farther inside, the wooden floor cold beneath his skin. The air smelled of old furniture and time locked away. His gaze dropped to the small bronze plaque beneath the painting. He already knew what it would say, but he forced himself to read it anyway. James Carson. 1955–1993, beloved father. The word father echoed in Tyler's mind, hollow and relentless. He had never had one, at least that was what he'd been told. The foster homes, the social workers, the stories about being abandoned at birth, all of it unraveled in that moment. The year burned into his thoughts. 1993, the same year Tyler was born. If his father died when he entered the world, then who made the decision to erase him from it? Tyler's hands shook as he dragged himself farther into the room, every movement sending pain up his arms. Covered furniture loomed like sleeping ghosts. A cold fireplace sat to the side, its mantel lined with dust-coated picture frames. One by one, he pulled himself closer. The first photo showed a man from the portrait standing beside a young woman with warm eyes and a hopeful smile. They were laughing, arms wrapped around each other, frozen in a moment that clearly mattered. On the back, faded ink read, "Spring 1990. The second frame stole the breath from Tyler's lungs. The same woman, now pregnant, her hand rested gently on her belly. Fear and joy mixed in her eyes like she already knew life would be fragile. That baby was him. Tears fell before he realized he was crying. The third photo shattered him completely. A hospital room. The woman in bed, exhausted but smiling, the man beside her, eyes filled with tears. And between them, wrapped in a blue blanket, a newborn baby. On the back, written simply, Tyler, March 15, 1993, his name, given with love, not a label slapped onto an abandoned child. Tyler had been wanted. So why was he alone? The answer was somewhere in this house, hidden in dust, silence, and decades of lies. And whatever it was, Tyler could feel it closing in. If the past was buried on purpose, what kind of truth was it trying to hide? And what price had already been paid to keep it silent? Tyler sat trembling on the cold floor, his back against an armchair draped in a yellowed sheet. The weight of discovery pressed down on him heavier than exhaustion ever had. He wasn't just a forgotten beggar, he wasn't a mistake. He had a father, a mother, a history that had been carefully erased. The room felt alive now, charged. Every creak of wood sounded deliberate, as if the house itself was watching him remember. He turned back toward the portrait of James Carson. The sadness in his father's painted eyes now made sense. This wasn't just a man frozen in oil, it was a man whose life ended before he could protect his son. Before he could stop someone else from deciding Tyler's fate. Dragging himself across the floor again, Tyler noticed something he had missed before. A faint draft brushed against his skin, carrying a cleaner, fresher scent out of place in a house steeped in decay. His survival instincts flared. Abandoned places didn't breathe like that. The source was a door nearly hidden behind a tall, dust-choked bookshelf. Tyler hesitated. Every truth so far had hurt more than the last. But stopping now would mean returning to the streets with questions heavier than hunger. He pushed the door open. It led to a study. Moonlight slipped through a narrow window, barely illuminating a heavy desk cluttered with yellowed papers and an old typewriter. The shelves lining the walls were packed with books no one had touched in decades, but something on the desk didn't belong to the past. A large cream-colored envelope. It was clean, untouched by dust, recent. Written on the front in careful, shaky handwriting was his full name, Tyler Bennett. His chest tightened. No one should have known to prepare this. No one should have expected him, yet here it was waiting. He pulled himself closer and picked it up. The paper was thick, expensive, sealed with red wax bearing an unfamiliar crest. His fingers hovered over it, fear battling with desperation. Inside were answers, but answers had already taken so much from him. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling old windows. The house groaned as if protesting what was about to be revealed. Tyler broke the seal. The sound cracked through the silence like a confession finally spoken. The first line made his vision blur. "My dear grandson Tyler, grandson," the world tilted. The stranger in the plaza wasn't a stranger at all. Elizabeth Carson, the woman with the trembling hands and burning eyes, was his grandmother, blood of his blood. The architect of the silence that defined his life. His hands shook as he read on, every word heavy with guilt and regret. She wrote of secrets carried for 32 years, of choices made in pride, of a sin that consumed her from the inside. Tyler pressed the letter to his chest, struggling to breathe. If this was only the beginning, how much worse could the truth get, and more terrifying still, what else had been hidden from him all this time? What hurts more, being abandoned without explanation or finally learning the reason why? Tyler was about to discover that some truths don't heal, they carve. He read the letter slowly, forcing himself to absorb every word even as his hands trembled. Elizabeth's handwriting wavered across the page, each sentence soaked in remorse that arrived decades too late. She wrote of family pride, of reputation, of a love she tried to control instead of protect. James, her only son, had loved a woman named Sarah. Tyler stopped reading for a moment, the name echoing in his chest. His mother had a name, a face, a life that existed before the streets swallowed him whole. Elizabeth described Sarah as young, poor, and invisible in the eyes of society, everything the Carson name was never supposed to be tied to. The words grew heavier. Elizabeth admitted she had forbidden the marriage, threatened to disown James, tried to tear them apart with cruelty disguised as authority. But love, she wrote, had won, at least for a while. James and Sarah married in secret. They built a small life without Carson, money without her. Tyler felt a strange warmth rise in his chest. His parents had chosen each other. They had chosen him. Then the letter turned dark. 3 weeks before Tyler was born, James died in an accident. Sudden, violent, final. Elizabeth described receiving the call, the sound of her world collapsing in an instant. Tyler read about a funeral he never attended, a grief that arrived too late to fix anything. And then came his birth, premature, fragile, complicated. Elizabeth wrote that the doctors said Tyler would never walk, that the delivery was traumatic, that Sarah looked at her newborn son and broke in a way no one noticed until it was too late. Tyler closed his eyes, his chest tightening. So that was it. His legs weren't cursed. He wasn't punished. He was the result of tragedy stacked upon tragedy, but the worst part of the letter hadn't arrived yet. Elizabeth confessed that she couldn't bear it, couldn't raise a child who carried her son's eyes, couldn't watch James live on in a body that reminded her of everything she lost. She wrote about offering Sarah money, about promises, about lies told easily in moments of power. Tyler's stomach twisted violently. She admitted to leaving him at a hospital, alone, wrapped in a blanket with nothing but a name. 32 years of suffering explained in ink. Tears dripped onto the page, blurring the words, but Tyler forced himself to keep reading. Elizabeth wrote of sleepless nights, of guilt eating her alive, of a house filled with ghosts and unanswered prayers. She wrote that she was dying. That time was running out, that this letter was all she had left to give. Tyler lowered the pages, his entire body shaking. That was it, the truth, ugly, cowardly, final, or so he thought. A sound echoed above him, a slow, deliberate creak. Footsteps, someone else was in the house. And suddenly, the past wasn't the only thing standing in the dark with him. What's worse than discovering your past was stolen, realizing someone else has been guarding it in silence all these years. The footsteps came again, slow, uneven, deliberate. Tyler's breath caught in his throat as he scanned the room, his pulse hammering so loud he was sure whoever approached could hear it. The house had been abandoned for decades. Dust coated every surface. No one should have been there, yet someone was. The sound shifted closer, followed by the faint flicker of light dancing along the hallway wall. Tyler's fingers scraped the floor until they closed around a cold metal object, an old letter opener. Dull, rusted, but heavy enough to matter. He dragged himself back until his shoulders hit the wall, eyes locked on the doorway. The light stopped. For a long moment nothing moved, then a figure stepped into view. An elderly woman, bent by time, holding a candle in one trembling hand and a cane in the other. Wax dripped onto her fingers, but she didn't seem to notice. Her hair was white and untamed, her clothes outdated and worn thin. But her eyes, sharp, alert, fixed on Tyler with something that looked dangerously close to recognition. "You came," she said softly. Tyler didn't lower the letter opener. "Who are you?" She stepped closer, the candlelight revealing every wrinkle carved by decades of waiting. "My name is Margaret," she said. "I worked in this house for most of my life." "I knew your parents." The letter opener slipped from Tyler's fingers and clattered across the floor. Margaret explained she had stayed behind when Elizabeth left, living in the forgotten servants' quarters, guarding a house no one wanted to remember. She spoke of Sarah, kind, young, terrified, of James, gentle, devoted, deeply in love, of promises whispered in kitchens and broken in silence. When Tyler showed her the letter, Margaret's expression hardened. "Lies," she said quietly. "Not all of it, but enough." Tyler's chest tightened. He thought he had reached the bottom of the truth. He was wrong. Margaret revealed what Elizabeth never admitted. Sarah hadn't taken money, she had been threatened, accused. Cornered by power she couldn't fight, forced to leave without her child to protect herself from a future Elizabeth was ready to destroy. Margaret had tried to find Tyler. Hospitals, churches, orphanages, but his name had been changed. His trail erased. "I failed you," she whispered, gripping his hand. "I waited 32 years for someone to come back for the truth." The silence that followed felt sacred, heavy, real. Then Tyler asked the question he had been afraid to speak aloud. "My mother," he said, "is she alive?" Margaret hesitated, too long. "Yes," she said finally, "but not in the way you're hoping." She told him where Sarah was, an institution. A place for minds broken by grief and loss too deep to survive. A place where time stood still. Tyler's world shifted again. His mother wasn't gone, she was waiting, and suddenly the truth wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about what he would do next. What happens when the person you've been searching for your entire life is still alive, but frozen in a world without you? And are you ready to face the damage truth leaves behind? Margaret's voice trembled as she spoke, each word dragging decades of guilt into the open. She explained how Sarah left that night with nothing but a small suitcase and a shattered heart. No money, no protection. Just fear and a lie forced into her hands. She took a bus to the city, believing her son would be safe, believing the promise Elizabeth never intended to keep. In the years that followed, Sarah tried to survive. She worked wherever she could, slept wherever she was allowed, and wrote letters, dozens of them. Letters asking about Tyler, begging for news, praying for reassurance that her baby was alive. Elizabeth intercepted every single one. Margaret revealed a box hidden away filled with unopened envelopes addressed in shaky handwriting. Tyler held them like sacred relics, his chest aching with a pain that felt almost unbearable. His mother had never forgotten him. She had never stopped trying, but grief is patient and relentless. Margaret described how Sarah's sorrow slowly poisoned her mind, first the drinking, then stronger escapes, anything to dull the silence where a baby's cry should have been. 15 years ago, a social worker reached out. Sarah had been found unconscious. She survived, but something vital never came back. She lives in a place called St. Mary's Peace Institute, Margaret said quietly. She spends her days waiting for a child she believes is still a newborn. The words hit Tyler harder than any confession before them. His mother hadn't gone mad. She had fled into a reality where loss never happened. Tyler broke down, his grief spilling out in raw, unfiltered sobs that echoed through the empty house. 32 years, 2 lives destroyed in parallel, both victims of the same choice, the same woman. Margaret placed 2 folded papers into his shaking hands, 2 addresses. One led to his mother, the other led to Elizabeth, a choice no one should have to make. Tyler stared at the paper for a long time. Every instinct screamed to go to his mother, to see her, to prove he existed, but something deeper pulled him in the opposite direction, a need for closure, for confrontation, for final truth. "I need to see my grandmother first," he said finally. Margaret didn't argue, she only nodded. "Then go while you still can." Hours later, Tyler sat on a bus heading toward the city, the mansion fading behind him like a bad dream he couldn't wake from. The vehicle rattled over the highway, each mile carrying him closer to the woman responsible for everything he'd endured. As dawn broke, Tyler felt fear settle in his gut, not fear of what Elizabeth might say. Fear of what hearing it might turn him into, because whatever truth she still held, it would be her last weapon, and Tyler was about to walk straight into it. What do you say to the person who ruined your life when they're already standing at the edge of death? And what happens when their final truth is even more devastating than the ones before it? The house in Chicago was quiet, too quiet. Heavy curtains blocked out the morning light and the air smelled of medicine and decay. Tyler dragged himself up the stairs one painful step at a time, leaving his wheelchair behind. Every movement burned, but he welcomed the pain. It kept him focused. It kept him grounded. At the end of the hallway, a door stood slightly open. Inside, machines hummed softly. A thin figure lay beneath white sheets, barely recognizable as the woman who had once stood in a crowded plaza and changed his life with a single sentence. Elizabeth Carson looked smaller now, fragile, her power stripped away by time and sickness. Her eyes opened when Tyler entered. "You came," she whispered. "I needed answers," Tyler replied, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. Elizabeth's breathing was shallow, each breath a visible effort. She admitted what the letter tried to soften, not just abandonment but intent. She spoke of jealousy disguised as protection, of fear twisted into control, of a love so possessive it destroyed everything it touched. "I didn't hate your mother because she was poor," Elizabeth confessed. "I hated her because she took my son away from me." Tyler felt something inside him crack, not into rage but exhaustion. Then she said the thing that stopped his heart. "Your mother didn't lose her mind," Elizabeth whispered. "She escaped into one." She explained how Sarah's mind fractured to survive the unbearable. How she lived in a world where James was alive, where Tyler was still in her arms, a place untouched by death or loss. Elizabeth had known this for years, paid for reports, watched from a distance. Controlled the damage she caused without ever fixing it. "She's been waiting for you," Elizabeth said, tears sliding into her ears. "Every day." Tyler stood in silence, the weight of that truth crushing down on him. His mother hadn't abandoned him, she had been holding on to him in the only way she could. "I don't forgive you," Tyler said quietly. Elizabeth nodded. "I don't deserve it." Moments later, her breathing slowed, then stopped. Tyler left without looking back. Outside, the city roared to life, indifferent to endings, but Tyler felt something shift. For the first time, he wasn't chasing answers anymore. He knew where he needed to go next. The institute waited on a hill at the edge of town, and somewhere inside, a woman was still holding a baby she never let go of. The final question wasn't whether Tyler would find his mother. It was whether love could reach across 32 years of silence and bring her back. What if the love you were denied your entire life was still waiting, untouched by time, unbroken by truth? And what if healing didn't begin with remembering but with being seen? St. Mary's Peace Institute sat quietly above the city, surrounded by tall trees and endless sky. Tyler arrived just after noon, the air crisp and still as if the world itself was holding its breath. A nurse guided him through long white corridors filled with murmured voices and soft footsteps. Every turn felt heavier than the last. "She's gentle," the nurse said carefully, "but she lives somewhere else." Tyler nodded. He understood now. His mother had survived by choosing a reality where pain couldn't reach her. The door opened to a sunlit room filled with drawings taped to the walls, crayon suns, stick figures holding hands, and in the center, sitting by the window, was Sarah. She looked younger than her years, peaceful. Her eyes were distant, fixed on the garden outside. She was humming softly, rocking back and forth with empty arms. Tyler's chest tightened painfully. He rolled closer, every nerve screaming. "Mom," he whispered, testing the word for the first time in his life. She turned slowly. Her eyes landed on him, unfocused at first, then something shifted. Confusion, curiosity, recognition without memory. She stood and stepped closer, her movements careful, fragile. She crouched in front of him, her gaze falling to his face. Her hand reached out, hovering just inches from his cheek. "You look tired," she said gently. "Have you eaten today?" The words shattered him. She wasn't waiting for a man, she was waiting for her baby. Tyler swallowed hard and nodded. "I'm okay," he said softly. "I just came home." Sarah smiled, a smile so pure it hurt. She pulled him into her arms, rocking him gently, humming louder now. Tyler closed his eyes and let himself be held for the first time ever. Tears soaked her shoulder, but he didn't pull away. Time stretched. Nurses watched from the doorway, silent. Sarah kissed his hair and whispered, "I knew you'd find me." In that moment, Tyler understood something vital. Healing didn't require explanations, it required presence. He began visiting every day. Sitting, listening, existing with her. Over time, the doctors noticed changes. Sarah started responding to her surroundings, asking questions, noticing years, and Tyler stopped begging. Margaret helped him file claims. The estate was his. The house, the money, but wealth didn't matter anymore. He stayed, because sometimes the ending isn't about justice, it's about reunion, and sometimes the deepest wounds don't disappear. They transform into love that finally finds its way home. What if the real victory isn't rewriting the past, but choosing what comes after it? And what if your story doesn't end where the pain began? Months passed quietly, the kind of quiet Tyler once feared, but this silence was different. It wasn't empty, it was full of routine, of presence, of healing that didn't announce itself but showed up anyway. Each morning he visited Sarah. Some days she remembered more, some days she drifted, and some days she simply smiled and held his hand like that was enough, and it was. The doctors called it progress, Tyler called it hope. The mansion on Sunflower Lane was restored slowly, not into a monument of wealth, but into a place that finally felt honest. The portrait of James Carson still hung in the living room, but now it was joined by new photographs. Tyler and Sarah in the garden, Margaret laughing at the table, proof that the future didn't have to look like the past to be meaningful. Tyler used the inheritance differently than anyone expected. He funded patient care, built access ramps, paid for therapy for families who had been erased by power and silence just like he had been. He didn't do it for redemption. He did it because he understood now neglect doesn't always come from cruelty. Sometimes it comes from fear wearing authority's face. As for Elizabeth, her name faded from conversation, not out of denial but release. Tyler didn't forgive her, but he no longer carried her choices like chains around his chest. One afternoon, as sunlight poured through the institute windows, Sarah looked at Tyler and asked a question she had never asked before. "How old are you?" Tyler smiled through tears. "Old enough," he said. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if something inside her finally clicked into place. "You grew up," she whispered. "Yes," Tyler said softly, "but I'm here now," and that was the truth. Life didn't become perfect. Some scars never disappeared, some memories never returned, but love stopped being theoretical. It became daily, tangible, real. Tyler was no longer the man the world walked past, he was the man who stayed. And maybe that's the quiet miracle no one talks about, the moment you stop surviving and start choosing. If this story moved you, if it made you pause, reflect, or feel something real, don't let it end here. Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. Like the video if it touched you. Speech balloon. Comment your thoughts below. Your voice matters. And thank you for watching until the very end.